to the Political Education for Freedom podcast. I'm Nitra, and today we're not just exploring history, we're redefining the narrative. We're delving into the roots of the civil rights movement and its transformative impact on education. Now, the last episode recorded, we talked about two key figures in the civil rights movement. We talked about Ella Baker, we talked about Claudette Colvin, and we talked about the 1967 TSU riots. We talked about some local stuff, and then we went to some of the national movements we often hear about with the civil rights movement in those different parts of education that we learn about it. But we only learn about certain people, certain events. We don't learn about everything and all those behind the scenes. So we kind of went deep into those stories and uncovered some local history that I wasn't aware of before I started researching this, and hopefully other people learn from that too. So we're talking about the civil rights movement and its impact on education. Now, this movement, born from a relentless struggle for equality, reshapes society and how we educate our youth. It's a journey through courage, resilience, and the pursuit of justice. Let's dive into the past to understand our present and shape our future. Okay, let's start at a pivotal moment in history, the Reconstruction era. Here, formerly enslaved Africans in America didn't just dream of freedom, they acted upon it. Their first priority? Education, of course. As W.E.B. Du Bois highlights in Black Reconstruction, these visionaries laid the foundations for public schools, advocating the radical idea of mass education for all. This was more than a policy shift, it was a cultural revolution. Here's some of Du Bois's work. Negroes deserve not only the pity of the world, but the gratitude of both South and North. Under extraordinary provocation, they had acted like decent human beings. They had protected their masters' families when their masters were away fighting for black slavery. They did this naturally because they were not sure that the North was fighting for freedom, and because they did not know which side would win. But at any rate, they did it. And even when they understood that the North, willing or unwilling, was bound towards freedom, and they could fight for their own freedom, they were neither vindictive nor cruel towards their former masters, although they were quite naturally widely accused of laziness and impudence, which are the only weapons of offense which a rising social class can easily use. These black men wanted freedom. They wanted education. They wanted protection. They had been of great help to the Union armies, and that help had been given under great stress. Black soldiers had been outlawed, and in many cases ruthlessly murdered by the enemy who refused to regard them as soldiers or as humans. They took chances every time they put on a uniform. Yet after the war, they were still not free. They were still practically slaves. And how was their freedom to be made a fact? It could only be done in one way. They must have protection of law, and back of law must stand physical force. They must have land. They must have education. Now, let me share something as a personal, as an educator. I'm a builder and, of course, an educator, but I'm on a mission to create a platform that teaches real history, our history, in a time where there's an assault on education, where the contributions and innovative minds of Black people worldwide are often sidelined. I believe it's crucial to get back to our roots. We're natural teachers, we're natural problem solvers and history makers. The civil rights movement, with its fight for educational equality, is a testament to our enduring spirit. From the Brown v. Board of Education victory to the bravery of the Little Rock Nine, we see a legacy of resilience and a call to action. These stories aren't just chapters in history books, they're blueprints for our future. And the words from a member of the Little Rock Nine. And she says, at a certain point, I didn't know if I would be alive to graduate from high school or be stark, raving, insane, or deeply wounded, says Tricky. Minnie Jean was the eldest of four children born to Willie Brown, a mason and landscaping contractor, and his wife, Emma Jean, a nurse's aide, seamstress, and a homemaker. This sounds like regular Black people. Everybody got like three jobs. If we don't have three actual jobs, we have three actual skills. So we kind of threw that old um, jack of all trades, master of none. That's completely opposite for Black people. A native of Little Rock, she attended segregated schools and started senior high school as a 10th grader in 1956 at a newly opened Horace Mann School for African Americans. It was across town from where she lived and offered no bus service. In the wake of the landmark 1954 Supreme Court decision, Brown v. Board of Education, that banned racial segregation in public schools, representatives from the NAACP searched for students who would enroll in previously all-white schools through the South. Minnie Jean heard an announcement on the school intercom about enrolling at Central and decided to sign up. Although 80 African American students had been approved by the Little Rock School Board to transfer to Central the following year, the number dwindled to 10 after the students were told they couldn't participate in extracurricular activities. Their parents were in danger of losing their jobs, and there was a looming threat of violence. The parents of the 10th student, Jane Hill, decided not to allow their daughter to return after the mob scene on the first day. So initially, we can say it was the Little Rock 10, but then one, of course, pulled out, and they became the Little Rock 9. According to Tricky, her real motivation for attending Central was that it was 9 blocks from her house. That sounds like a high school kid. And she and her two best friends, Melba and Thelma, would be able to walk there. She quotes, she says, in quotes, "The 9 of us were not especially political," she says. "We thought we could walk to Central. It's a huge, beautiful school. This is going to be great," she remembers. "I really thought that if we went to school together, the white kids are going to be like me, curious and thoughtful, and we can just cut all this segregation stuff out," she recalls. Unfortunately, she was wrong. Arkansas Governor Orville Faubus called the National Guard to keep the African American students from entering Central. When the 9 students did get into the building a few weeks later, that means these kids lost weeks of instruction. I mean, gosh, can we imagine? And I don't imagine this, but we know that it exists because it actually happened. But not just stopping the education of someone else's kid, but halting the education of your own kid. Like, you have to be a special kind of person to do something like that. You're not just, for one, it's all out of hatred because there's nothing to justify that type of uh, behavior from an adult. But you're holding back your child. I thought that the entire purpose of them, quote unquote, fighting for white supremacy was so that their kids can continue to be ahead, and so their kids can have more knowledge than the next, and that their kids can continue to rule over other people. But yet, the logic in their mind, they're saying, no, we don't want to teach our kids because they're going to be learning on side of someone who's a different color. So I'm going to keep my child stupid just so that he or she won't learn on side of a black child. That is the dumbest I've ever, that's the dumbest logic I've ever heard. And I've seen this in reading so many of these cases, and how these parents acted is just, it's really, it's no explanation for it. But also, the weird thing about that is that this was in the 1950s, but guess what? This is 2023, and we have parents doing the same thing right now to this day. They would rather have their children be uninformed, uneducated, and stupid than for them to learn about someone else's history or culture. Because now they're not saying, I don't want you in the same school with my kid, because that's already happened. That cat's out the bag. But now they're saying, well, now I don't want you to talk about that other person's experience or that other person's culture or their background or their history. I have a personal belief that it's not because it's also because they hate it, but it's also because they don't want their kids to know how horrible people they are. They know that their kids would see it and maybe have some empathy or sympathy for the victims, and then their kids may question them, like, what kind of person are you to do that to a kid? And they think, I believe, that their kids would then, reject them, reject their ideas. Not only just reject their ideas, but also reject them and their beliefs. And we know what typically happens with white people, right? They avoid confrontation at all costs. So instead of them going up to Uncle Racist Joe every fucking holiday get together, they'll just not show up to avoid Uncle Racist. Well, I don't have time to hear Uncle Racist and his racism, so I'm just not going to the party. And then you look up and it's been 10 years and they haven't seen their family, extended family. But guess what? Even though they haven't seen their extended family, racism has seen their extended family. Uncle Racist is still racist. Just because you don't show up does not mean that his racism don't show up. The only way his racism will stop showing up is, for one, you stand up and tell him that he can't do that. And you're not going to stand for it. And he either going to shut his mouth or he going to have to get the hell out. Or you stand there next to Uncle Racist and you challenge his racism until he's uncomfortable. Until he's uncomfortable